Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater Soundcheck. This time out, a grid-based groove box from Novation. Let's get started. Today we're checking out Circuit, a very easy to use and intuitive groove box from Novation. Circuit is packed with features including 6 different sound engines, onboard effects, an onboard sequencer engine, and lots of automation capabilities that allow you to create very expressive tracks. As I mentioned, Circuit has 6 onboard sound engines. The first 2 of those are synthesizer engines based on the Mini Nova from Novation. We also have 4 drum engines, each of which can create an independent sound. The way things are arranged is, we have a session, and a session can consist of up to 8 patterns, and each of those patterns contains a track for each of the synthesizers as well as a separate track for each of the 4 drum engines. We have 8 onboard macro controls. Those are the knobs that are arrayed here across the top, and those allow you to adjust parameters on the sound engines as well as different parameters inside Circuit itself. We also have an overall filter on the output, as well as an onboard mixer and onboard delay and reverb effects. Let's take a quick tour of the front panel. It's actually very easy to navigate because things are broken down by function. Across the top, as I mentioned, we have the macro control, so there's 8 of those for adjusting parameters. Then we have the main filter control and master volume. Along the left-hand side, the buttons switch the views, so they change what we're looking at on the grid here in the center of Circuit. On the right-hand side, we have the main function controls that switch us among pattern view, mixer view, effects, as well as record and playback buttons. Here above the grid, we have 8 buttons for controlling the sound engines. Then we have various function keys here between the macros and the sound engine switches. Each of the synthesizers has 64 presets, and each of the drums also has 64 presets, so you have a lot of sounds to choose from when you're creating your tracks. You can record parts either in real time or in step time. Let's take a look at how easy it is to create a track inside a Circuit. We begin by creating a new session. So we'll switch to our session view here. The 16 buttons here that are illuminated actually have factory preset sessions already stored in them. Now you can record over the top of those, they aren't protected, or you can use any of the 16 blank session locations here at the bottom. So we'll choose a blank session here. Now we'll switch to pattern view. In pattern view, we can see the 8 different patterns that are available for each of the sound engines. So Synth Engine 1 has its 8 patterns, Synth Engine 2, 8 patterns, and the patterns for the different drum parts as well. You can switch among the 8 patterns per track manually, or you can chain them together in sequences of up to 8 patterns, so you can have up to a 128-step sequence if you like. When we selected the pattern we want to work on, in this case we'll choose pattern 1 for each of our tracks. Now we can switch to note view. In note view, we can either manually enter or step enter our parts, or we can play them in real time. So we choose a sound engine. In this case I'm on Synth 1, and it's actually a split grid here. On the top we have the actual note, and on the bottom, we have our 16 sequence steps. To enter a part, simply hold down a step, press a note. When we hit play, we can enter a drum part the same way. We'll choose drum 1. Now in this case, we have drum 1 on the top 16 pads and drum 2 on the bottom 16 pads. So drum 1 is set to our kick drum. We'll enter steps for that, and then we'll enter a couple of steps for our snare drum on drum 2. Now drum 3 and drum 4 will be our hi-hat. It's just that simple and that fast to create a pattern inside Circuit. Now you can also record a part in real time. So we'll switch over to Synth 2, hit our record button. It'll automatically quantize your performance to fit into the 16 steps at the bottom of the grid. Now editing a pattern is very simple. We just stay in our note view, select one of the steps that's illuminated, which shows us there's a note stored there. The red light indicates which of our notes is actually active, so we can turn that off. Or we could put a different note in, or a chord if actually our sound is polyphonic. We can adjust the velocity for each note. So we can see here what our velocity is for each step. We can also adjust the gate time, which is how long the note sustains for. So if we go to our first note here, it's a very short note, we can make that longer. We can make this one shorter. We can also set the octave for each note. Go back to note view here, choose a note. We also have control over the different synthesis parameters. To demonstrate this, I'm going to mute all the tracks except for synth 2, and then we'll take a look at what those macro controls are doing. So we always have 8 different parameters that are available to us per sound engine on those macro knobs. And you also can record any moves that you make with those macro knobs into your sequence and have them play back via automation. We also have dual onboard effects, reverb and delay, and we have sends available for each of the different sound engines. So if we play this back, go to our synth 1 and our effects. At the top, we have 16 different delay presets. And on the bottom, we have reverb effects. We have a mixer available that allows us to either mute tracks or to control their level. So if we switch here, as far as audio processing, we also have a master filter effect that can be applied on the stereo outputs. When we turn the master filter to the left, we get a low-pass filter. When we turn it to the right, we get a high-pass filter. We also have 16 onboard scales that you can use to create your compositions, and these range from chromatic scales to all sorts of exotic scales, pentatonic scales. Accessing them is very easy. You don't have to know anything about music theory. It's simply laid out on the grid, and you can choose whatever notes you like, and they'll instantly be in the right scale. So we can choose, for example, a chromatic scale. We could also switch, for example, to a pentatonic scale. So everything you play would be constrained to that minor pentatonic scale. We aren't limited to just 16 steps in our grid either. We can do what's called an expanded view, where we hit the note view, and now we have all 4 rows available in our grid for playing the scale, so we have 4 octaves available to us. And you could also use the octave keys, or switch the key center for the particular scale you're working on to transpose to another key or another octave you want to work in. As I mentioned earlier, we have 64 different presets for each of the synthesis engines. Let's check out some of those sounds. We access those using the Shift key and pressing the synth button. That calls up the different patches. Now when we move to a different patch, we'll be able to hear the sound that's stored there. So here's our first one. Second one. So there are a wide variety of sounds available for creating your compositions. Then you have access to those 8 macro parameters for shaping the sounds even further. We can adjust the tempo by holding the tempo knob. And when we do that, the tempo is actually displayed here. We're at 120 beats a minute. We can adjust that up or down, and it tells us exactly what our tempo is. Or you can choose to tap in the tempo that you want. So you have access to either method for entering the tempo. Circuit also supports MIDI communication. There are 2 jacks on back, and you use breakout cables to hook those up to standard MIDI gear, or hook it up by USB to your computer, and you can send MIDI back and forth that way. When you do that, you can synchronize the clock inside Circuit to your computer or to an external MIDI device, or you could use the Circuit clock as your master clock in your system. There's so much more we could talk about with Circuit. It has so many features that make it so simple and so easy to create music. It has an onboard speaker, it'll operate off batteries, which I'm running it right now on 6 AA batteries, or it'll work with a power supply, so you really can take it anywhere that you want to go. You can make music no matter where you're located. I hope you enjoyed this quick look at Novation's new Circuit Groovebox. It really is a fun and creative tool that you're going to have a blast using to create music. Thanks for joining me for Sweetwater Soundcheck. I'm Mitch Gallagher.